given everything that's been going on in the news, everywhere you turn, people are talking about law enforcement based on the events of the last couple months. And you have something that I've never seen in my lifetime, where you have a bunch of cities and departments where they're talking about actually defunding their police department. And there's some debate whether or not that means shuffling around resources, or do they actually mean disbanding the police department. I've heard people say both, advocate for both. The Minneapolis, my understanding is the Minneapolis just voted to actually disband their police department today or yesterday, although I see a few council members at the same time hired their own private security, which is unsurprising. But and here in Portland, they've gotten rid of the school resource officers, the SRO program, which I want to talk to you about. They got
happened in Oakland too.
Okay, yeah,
Oakland did it.
They got rid of the gun violence response team, GVRT, which is what used to be the gang unit here in Portland. So those are the guys that respond to all the shootings, of which I don't think everybody knows this, but this year, so we're going into July, about half a year, we've already had 245 shootings this year, which is pretty high. Last year, I think they took off almost 100 guns off the street in these situations, but they've disbanded that. And I believe they have eliminated the transit police. So one way or another, people, city council members and cities around the country are making very dramatic decisions. And just to add to that, a few nights ago, some protesters blocked the exit to a black-owned business called Mid-K Beauty that's down the street from my house on Killingsworth, and is connected and linked to the police station on MLK in Killingsworth. So they blocked the exits so nobody could get out, and then they set the building on fire. They destroyed Mid-K Beauty. The police department turned out okay, but I was down there the other day with the family for the press conference, and every store that was destroyed, and they destroyed a few, was black-owned. And the pastors were there, and they're angry. They called this terrorism and attempted murder. So there's a lot of turmoil going on right now. And in that kind of environment, getting rid of something like the gun violence response team or the SRO program seems insane to me. But, different people have different views about it. And as I look around and I read and I hear everything, the people who seem to be heard from the least are law enforcement professionals. Those aren't the people I'm seeing on TV. Those aren't the people that are writing the newspaper columns. We're talking about the policy. So given your long background in law enforcement, and I know you've been involved in training, you worked in the jail, you worked on the street, you work with the SRO program. So each one of these things we're talking about, you actually have personal experience as your job, as your career working on it. So I couldn't think of a better person to talk to. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. Appreciate you doing it. And I think everybody in SBG kind of knows you as one of the SBG's black belts, but why don't you tell everybody briefly about your law enforcement career?
Okay. I'm horrible at doing this, but second generation. So my mom was a deputy for 28 years. And I was a bouncer in a nightclub, and I figured if I'm going to get shot at, I might as well get paid to do it. So right. I figured it was the best thing. Yeah. So it is actually a reach out from my mom. She's like, just try out one more time. So I was like, because I tried out when I was like 21, 22, and they turned me down because I was,
Right for the sheriff's department?
Yeah. And by 26, I got in. I was in the academy. So for the sheriff's office, I worked in there. Within the first year, I was approached by some sergeants, and they told me that they wanted me to be a range instructor, which I told them they were nuts because I was only on this. There was a detention response team. I said I'd only been on it for a few months, and the guys would be mad at me, and they're like, they didn't care. They wanted me to do it. And shortly after that, I went into instructor development, then defensive tactics, and then EVOC, impact weapons instructor. I just became instructors in all of these different disciplines, high liability disciplines for the agency, and which then led me to work in the training department and then teach at the academies. And then by year 5, I was about to get married, and I working swing shift and graveyard was hard on the family and that. So I switched over to a local department, a school police department. And which was cool about that department is that they only have day shift, weekends, and holidays off. So it was like being a firefighter, but I just didn't have to go in a fire truck, But
that's
like
the SRO program, right?
What's that?
That is the SRO program, right?
Well, it's interesting that you say that. So there is an SRO program, but there's also school police departments. Like the knowledge that I have of the Oakland school police, they had a school police department, not an SRO program. So SRO programs it's a program that's they go out for outside teaching, and what happens is it's usually for rural towns like sheriff's departments or even like Minneapolis. What they'll do is they will take traditional law enforcement and then they will insert them into a school, and then they're a school resource officer. And I think that's a lot of the reason why maybe those were disbanded, because they didn't want the traditional mindset versus a school police department. School police department like ours, we have canines, we have detectives, we have motor unit, we have victim advocate, we have emergency management. We're a full-fledged police department, just like Clark County School District Police Department. They're 24/7 and they have everything that we have, but much, much more, because they're huge, one of the biggest school districts. So there is a difference between a school police department and an SRO program in that.
So a city like Portland, where we had the SRO program, that's somebody that's still working for Portland PD, but they're attached and assigned specifically to work with the school.
They're usually going to be working for a municipal or most likely a sheriff's department. And then again, they insert them into the school to be a part of that program. And
what, in your mind, do you think that was a successful program, or what was the value of that?
So I'll tell you, it definitely more rewarding in this. And now I've moved up, I went in the management portion of it. So, you could say I drank the Kool-Aid or, officer level or whatever, but I've had a chance to implement and make changes and make the department better than it was when I was in there. So going back to that, a lot of these, like the campus officers that work on the campuses can continually work with the municipal and the sheriff's department. They'll come in because a lot of the stuff that happens either in the city, within the city, or within the school, they transpose. So things that happen in the school will carry off into the street. So we have to tell, the local agencies, hey, be on the lookout. There could be a gang issue tonight because these two sets had an issue with each other today. Right. Because if it started in the school, it's going to go out the street. Now, same exact thing. If and our gang unit is regional, so our gang unit works with the municipal and the sheriffs. We have a regional gang unit, and they all work together for that very reason, because the intel's so real that it transcends. It doesn't just stay in one environment. The schools are a part of that community, if you will. Does that make sense?
No, it makes sense. I guess I'm asking from a broader perspective. Do you think that the program's been successful in cities where it's worked? Have there been studies on it? I don't know about that. So there's the NASRO, the National School Resource Officers Organization. They put out a really, really thick booklet. You can find it online. I could probably find it for you and provide a link. And it shows the definite impact that it has had, because the officers, a lot of the times these kids will reach out to the officer before they will to the counselor or to somebody that works in the school, because they trust the officer. Okay. These officers, I'm not kidding you, the campus officers, they know who's dating whose parents are divorced, grades, who gets along with who. A lot of the times there will be issues in the community, and then a municipal officer will come in, or a sheriff's department officer will come in, and they'll say, hey, do you know these people? And our officers know them right out of the gate. So just in working with them inside the school, I would say just seeing the relationships, like it was brought up about defunding and what happened. And it wasn't that anybody in our area was looking to it, but a lot of the kids stepped up and said, there's no way, we love our officers, don't even think about this. They got more support from the kids than anything. There was also a governor's task force here,
And a lot of the kids stepped up and came in and just said how amazing the officers were, what a staple they were. Like they had a graduation here, and one of our officers, because of the whole COVID issue, they didn't think that they were going to get to see him. So they actually made a cardboard cutout of him so that they could have a picture with their officer. That's how impactful that these guys feel about these guys. So they really, in that aspect, our officers are really, they're getting, the municipal guys are taking a beating right now because they feel like they're not wanted. But on the flip side, our school officers are being, touted and loved, if that makes any sense.
And what do they wind up dealing with the most? I know that'll vary city to city, but what's a typical type of thing?
When I left the sheriff's office, I thought, this will be a good gig. It'll be easy.
Right.
And I was wrong. I was super wrong. And everybody that's ever come over, because what happened was the school police department wasn't armed, and that was, a lot of guys didn't want to do it. Right. And then they got armed, and a lot of traditional law enforcement guys were like, "This is a sweet gig. Let's go do this." So everybody went over there once they got armed, and what was the question? Because sorry.
What kind of problems do they?
Problems. So yeah, once they got armed, all the traditional guys came over, and then they realized, my God, I didn't realize how busy it was over here. Right. And it's not to say that, that the schools are crazy, but it's just, you're talking about young adults, right? Making the same decisions that people are making out in community. So it threats, weapons, drugs, gang violence. We do, we're in charge of our jurisdiction is every single property that we have, which is over 103 properties, which seems like a lot, but when you look at Las Vegas, they have like over 300 properties that those guys are looking at. So we have a very, very big square mileage. And so we're dealing with that, all of our properties, and the students to and from school. So we can deal with sometimes child abuse, right. DUIs. Yeah. So there's a lot of that too. So our officers have to be really well versed in juvenile law, but we're also dealing with adult law. And then we also have multiple jurisdictions that we're dealing with as well. So there's a lot of the same stuff. Traditional police officer, like Tom and Jason, those guys will, they're looking at dead bodies in the morning. That's when they usually find out, or alarm calls. That's right. Stuff that we're not really seeing. Maybe more domestic violence calls. We'll get a little bit of that, but not nearly to the volume that those guys get. Right. Our volume of call is going to be, again, fighting, drugs, weapons, things like that.
Right. And it sounds very much like a necessary program.
100%. One of the things, like, I'll tell you right now, traditional law enforcement in our area does not necessarily know how to deal with threats or, let's just say there could be a gun call at a school. Mm-hmm. Traditional law enforcement is going to come in with, SWAT vehicles and, lock down buildings and go in guns ablazing. And I try to tell them, because I'll have these guys, hey, my kid goes to that school. What's going on there? And I'm telling them it's okay. We got this. Mm-hmm. Try to tell them that we're dealing with it, because we deal with it a lot. We get a lot of calls. Doesn't necessarily mean they pan out, right? Sometimes it's just someone hurt. Sometimes it's a fake gun. Sometimes it's an airsoft weapon. Sometimes it's a real gun, right? But how we deal with that, because we deal with that, we're very successful. And going back to that is our campus officers, more times than not, will get, if you will, a confidential informant that will come in and say, hey, Joey's got a gun. So-and-so said he's going to shoot up. And we have a protocol on how we deal with that. And we put a lot of things in place to be very successful. Whenever anyone makes a threat of any kind, we investigate it, and we make sure that the parents know. We make sure that the schools know. We put counselors involved, because who knows if somebody would have stepped in for Adam Lanza at that time? Would that have changed the outcome of that? I don't know, but we're trying to stop future tragedy
before it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of stuff that in terms that I hear floating around cable news and in the newspaper, and I think the vast majority of Americans probably don't really, if they haven't worked in law enforcement, may not have a solid understanding of what we're talking about. So one of those that I hear talked about quite a bit now is qualified immunity. People wanting to get rid of qualified immunity. So for everybody who doesn't have a good idea what that is, can you explain that to me real quick?
It makes the officer immunity. It gives him immunity to being sued unless the other party can
Right.
state that you violated their constitutional rights.
Right.
Right. That a reasonable person would have known, or you should have reasonably known. And there's the key. If I had reasonably known, so they have to prove that, hey, how did you not know that this was a violation of their rights?
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes 100% sense.
And that's it.
So what would be the downside to, let's say all of a sudden we repeal that? What's going to happen in law enforcement? What actually happen?
I just think that takes away, there'd be tons of lawsuits because
nobody's going to want to do the job.
Yeah, it would be insane.
Yeah.
I guess you just open that door to just sue for every little thing, officer violated this right, so that right.
Right.
And yeah, you're right. Who would want to do the job at that point?
And do you think it's a good idea to get rid of it?
No. The officers, there's a balance with everything, and the officers need that protection because of the job that they're doing.
Right.
They get the training to understand, again, what constitutional rights are. And if I can, that's the whole point. When you go to court and I look at this and I say, did I have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to stop this person? Was I legally bound to be there? What was the core transaction?
Right.
That's the whole point of articulation.
I think ultimately the reason why people are trying to get rid of qualified immunity is in a situation like happened with George Floyd. They want to personally sue the officer. But if the officer is found guilty of a crime, then you can, right? There can be a civil suit against the officer, or no?
Absolutely. And that's you're going to be, there's two different things to look at, right? No matter what, you're going to be sued, and it's going to be the department. They have the deeper pockets, right? That's really where it's going to go.
Yeah, you're not going to get rich suing a police officer.
No. And any cop that's ever been involved in any kind of arrest throughout his career, I'm telling you, has probably been and had some sort of a lawsuit or threat of a lawsuit towards them to look at what they do. Well, all law enforcement, to include our department, has an internal investigation, and they should, right? Unless there's a conflict of interest, and then you would go outside of your agency to get a fair investigation of that.
Right.
Like what I got into is very different now.
What changed?
Well, I think it's not, I know it's the attitude towards police. It's people before there was respect, they would listen. I remember when I was a kid and a cop stopped me, I was like, yes, sir. Right. People talk about, some people are more afraid when a cop pulls them over. To this day, when a cop pulls me over, and, sometimes I get pulled over, but I will roll the window down.
Yeah.
My hands go on the steering wheel.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yes, sir. But I just think that it's this questioning everything and not respecting the law in and of itself has changed. The thing about it is I've kind of broken it down. Like usually guys will do roughly 25 years, a little more, but it's interesting. The first 8 years, that kind of group of officers will relate to each other really, really well. Then you'll have the middle 8 that relate to each other really well. And then you have the last 8 years of those officers. Does that make sense so far?
Yeah. 3 generations.
In the last 8 years, those are your dinosaurs or your rods retired on duty. A lot of people don't like the old guys.
Yeah.
And the old guys and the young guys, they're like, youngsters, shut your mouth, or, whatever. They get along, but there's always this, they don't really understand each other too well. The guys in the middle can kind of relate to everybody.
Right.
But I'll tell you what, that last 4 years of that 8, you're an anomaly because the apartment that you came into back in, maybe the early 90s is completely different now.
Right.
And you're like, I don't understand law enforcement. It's different. It's changed because it's always, maybe reform or policies or, things have to change because of the way you did business out in the street, or someone made a mistake and it's like, yeah, we can't do that now. And these older guys don't understand that. And if they don't have the ability to adapt and change, then they kind of, they stick out like a sore thumb, and then they almost feel like attacked sometimes. I see this, sure. Right? And a lot of the times they just leave. And, when you'll ask them, they're like, it's time. It's just time. But the new guys coming in, they're like, I don't know what he's complaining about. But that's the thing. they're coming in. This is the way it's always been. So
Right.
they're totally good with it. It'd be really interesting to see them in the last 4 years of their career where they're like, I don't understand law enforcement anymore. Right?
Yeah. So after the George Floyd incident, Paul Sharp put a post up where he talked about the importance of training, and how ultimately um, this is always going to come down to an issue. When I say this is always, I'll qualify that in a minute, but solutions are going to involve better training. I mean, when you have a case of an officer who's clearly bad, or an officer who's breaking the law, or an officer who hurts someone like with George Floyd, then of course they're going to get fired, they're going to get due process, and then they're going to be arrested and go to jail like anybody else. But in other circumstances that aren't so cut and dry, you and I could both name lots of incidents, lots of cases where things haven't gone as well as they could have, to say the least, because there was a lack of training at the time for the officers. And then I know every time an incident like that happens, there's a lot of very smart people who are professionals in law enforcement that get together and say, how can we prevent this from happening again? And there's a wealth of knowledge there, a community of people with that knowledge. This is part of why it blows my mind when people are talking about eliminating police departments. It's like they have no idea the amount of thought that has gone into the procedures you guys have as it is, right? Yeah. And you're going to start from scratch with it's like firing all the black belts, and we're going to hire 2 weak white belts who are going to come over and take over the whole system, basically. But back to my original point. So Paul was mentioning why ultimately it's going to come down to better training, which I think is very true. And you've had a lot of experience in that aspect as well. You've done a lot of officer training. So if you could wave a magic wand right now, where would you immediately begin changing as it relates to training, what officers tend to do now?
That's a great question. There's a lot in there, what you just said. My brain's going all over the place. So yeah, for whatever reason, I had the fortunateness to be able, like from year one, I've been in law enforcement for 22 years, and at 21 of those years, I've been a trainer.
Right.
Even where I'm at now, I still try to teach and train if I can, because I love it.
Yeah.
And I will tell you this, not to to blow smoke, but the I method was a game changer, because I started implementing that into the police training.
Yeah.
And man, it's night and day in what you can do. Trainer makes all the difference, just like a trainer and just like a teacher in a school. You could probably go back and think about a teacher that you had in school. Some are effective and some aren't.
Right.
And that's key. You need a good training cadre, right? First off, they need to learn how to teach. Not everybody can teach, right? You talk about that all the time, where some famous boxer's dad wanted to teach him, and then his boxing went down the drain, because not all people are set to teach. So getting good teachers is one key to that. Yeah. But you can see a lot in the training, and it is that it's evaluating, it's putting the training out, seeing what's working and what's not, right? And here's the thing. Yeah, when you hear defunding, the first thing I thought of, I think I even made a post on that. The first thing I thought of is, you know what? Because what does defunding mean? Defunding to me just sounds like taking money from the department. They can't hire officers. Yeah, cutting money from the department. Dismantling is something completely different. Right. So if you're going to take money from the department, it usually, I'm telling you, first comes from training. Yeah. And if you don't like the performance that you see right now with your officers, right, you take the training away, you're really not going to like it there either. Right. And I think that what you were leading to is look, if I'm not doing well at cross-side bottom escapes, well, guess what? I need more training in cross-side bottom escapes. I need to do it more and more and more.
Well, for people, not to interrupt you, Ray, but for people who don't know, who haven't had any experience in law enforcement, if we take a department, so let's say I'm in Salem, Oregon, or some mid-sized town, a department in the United States, what is the typical training that an officer gets that's walking around on the street? Not somebody who like us trains on their own.
Gotcha.
Only the department training. What do they get before they get out there?
So if you really want to go, if we start from the beginning, there's a huge process to even become a police officer, right? You have to go through a psychological eval. You have to go through a lie detector test. You have to go through a very, very detailed background check, which goes through your finances. These people know more about you than your own parents do, maybe even yourself at some point.
Right.
You have to do a physical with a doctor, and you have to do a physical fitness test. You go through all that, and then you take a test to see where you fit in, and then you go into an academy. Roughly the academies, that's where you're going to get your basic training, you know, to just go to a department, to teach you how to be a law enforcement officer.
How long is the academy?
Roughly, like this area is right now we're at 20 weeks. Like I think Highway Patrol, they'll do like a 6-month live-in academy.
Okay.
Really militaristic too, you know, the standing at attention and that. And a lot of the academies used to be that way, and they've changed as well. But about 20 weeks here, maybe 22, somewhere in there.
Okay.
You'll go to that academy. Then what will happen is then your agency will take you on. Then they'll pull you in, and then they have usually more training to say, all right, this is how we do paperwork. And some agencies, like one of the agencies here, actually pulls them out and makes them do boxing because they want them to fight for a week, you know. So they'll do that. So they'll go to their prospective agencies, and then what they do is they go into what's called an FTO program, Field Training Officer Program. That is going to be usually 4 phases and another 20 to 24 weeks of on-the-job training, working with another veteran officer that is a trainer that teaches you, that basically evaluates you and everything that you do, how you make decisions, what decisions you make, tell you what you could have done better on that call, what mistakes you made, and all that other stuff. Right. And that's 4 months of that, and it's pretty stressful. Right. And you're shifting too. You'll go from day shift to swing shift to graveyard, back to day shift, all kinds of stuff. Then you get done with that. Then what you have is your probationary period, which is going to be the last 8. It's a full year, but the 4 months of that training is part of it. So another 8 months on probation.
Right.
Then you get confirmed, some call it, and then you're now an officer that is on your own, self-sustaining. Not that you weren't. Once you get off FTO, you're sustained, but you're not off probation. Because you could still mess up and they could get rid of you for any reason, right? I mean, they have to have documentation for it, but that's the training you get. After that is where I start to kind of roll my eyes, because you've got a good solid base of training. And then what happens is now it's called in-service training. And there's a lot that you have to do. You know, there's updates, legal updates that you have to do. You know, that's important. But post police officer standards of training will dictate, hey, these are the things that need to be done. And if you don't do them, what they do is they say that you're delinquent, and then people can see this. They can go online and check it out, and then they realize that the department didn't teach their officers the in-service training that post requires. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And post is going to require firearms. So you have to show proficiency in firearms. You have to show proficiency in weaponless defense or defensive tactics. And that will include inside of that weapons retention, handcuffing, control holds, takedowns. You have to show proficiency in those areas of the program. Then they're going to give you a refresher on OC, baton, taser. And it's just to show proficiency. It's not a whole training class, because it's like, look, you got the training in the academy. So now we're just updating that. And a lot of the times, like, let's just take weaponless defense. It's 8 hours. 8 hours in 1 year. Every year it's 8 hours. And that's all you get. And in that 8 hours, they're going to go over policy. So that takes up some time. Mm-hmm. They're probably going to include the ASP and OC. Mm-hmm. That's going to take up some time. So maybe that's 3 hours. Maybe it's 2 hours. But then you've only got 6 left to teach handcuffing, disarms, or weapon retention. And how valuable is that? I mean, how much more would you need? I just talked to a buddy of mine, Mike Sion. He gets an hour or 2 hours. That's it. A year. And when you think jiu-jitsu, you think, like I gave the analogy of like just a high school basketball player. Those guys practice Monday through Friday so that they can have game night on Friday or Saturday. And they do that every week and then have camp. Why? So they can be proficient. When you take a professional basketball player, they're always playing. They're always doing something. And that's a game.
Right.
Now I've got a guy that needs to be proficient for his life, right? The policy at the time, it stated that a distractionary strike is valid, right? But now that has to be evaluated. People think that this just goes away. They're going to be looked at. That's a use of force now that has to be looked at, because one, there was injury involved, right? So when asked, it's like, well, what did you think? Should they have done this? And I'm like, well, it fit in policy. Well, would you have done this? Well, no, I wouldn't do it because I have more training.
Right.
I have more options under my belt.
Right.
That's the only option that he has. That's the only option that you give him, with the training that you give him.
Right.
Well, it was deemed, well, because it was in a confined environment, you are not allowed to do distractionary strikes. However, if you were on the street, because backup is so far away, you are allowed to do it, but not in this confined environment. So now you've tied their hands.
Right.
And then you could see morale drops. Guys are like, well, now I can't do this. I can't do that. They're afraid.
Right.
And I've seen too many times where guys are not proficient in what they're doing. And when they go to do these Aikido twist locks, because that's a lot of the agencies do this stuff, the guy fights, they twist harder. Well, that now adds pain to me. And I think Paul, I laugh when Paul says it, you turn the guy into a big green monster. He's absolutely right. The more pain you add, now the guy starts to fight. This guy twists even more.
Yeah.
Then you wind up hurting him. Then the fight's on, the deputy officer, whoever gets hurt. And it didn't have to be that way.
Right.
If they had better training, more time in training, I don't even say better training. If they had more time in training to learn how to be comfortable, I believe that there would be a better outcome.
Oh, no doubt.
That's why I support this.
Yeah.
100%. Get them more training. I know there's some philosophies out there about, like, I'd said something about jiu-jitsu, and I know there's some that don't agree with that, about officers getting it. I'm not saying that jiu-jitsu is the answer.
I wouldn't agree with that, just out of curiosity. What was the argument?
I don't even know what the argument. I think it's because it's not, because it's not a real, it's not a real fight going to the ground, and I think maybe looking at it more of a sport versus, and I always loved SBGs, and I just talked about that today. Here's the deal: when we're teaching jiu-jitsu, I'm not just teaching it for jiu-jitsu. I made a big point about the upright guard again because of watching your video, and I'm like, yeah, absolutely, and because I was teaching half guard today. But I said, look, it's got to fit into this filter. It's got to be able to go gi, no gi, MMA, and self-defense. If it doesn't, then why are we doing it, right? Now, if you know that it's only for BJJ and you still want to do that, then great, but you understand the risk that it doesn't fit into these other categories, right? And I'm not saying that BJJ is that, because there's a local guy here that was involved in teaching officers, and he was trying to teach them intricate jiu-jitsu.
Right.
And it's like, why would you do that with the minimal time that you have? And how long did it take you to learn that move?
That's not a problem with jiu-jitsu. That's a problem with the teacher.
Right. And there you go. We talk about the bad teachers, but I think the jiu-jitsu would help if you have a clear a system to teach your officers. Great. You teach them that because it has to be standardized. You and I talked about that.
Yeah.
Once that's standardized, jiu-jitsu complements that. It teaches them how to do that better.
Yes.
And it's going to make them a better person. It's going to make them a better problem solver. It's going to make them overall understand and be more comfortable when dealing with physical altercation.
Right.
Because I'm telling you what, you're underneath Matt Thornton getting, crushed. You learn to relax and go to a happy place.
Yeah. No, I can't imagine an intelligent argument against jiu-jitsu. Not the jiu-jitsu we're talking about, but
That's what I'm saying. I'm not talking about it being the answer. It's a good compliment, right?
Yeah. You mentioned something else that I think is interesting, because I think a lot of people who aren't familiar with law enforcement and have not been around that community or spent any time there have this idea that law enforcement is still like Serpico in 1973, where you're going to be shooting somebody or beating somebody, and then there's no paperwork and everything just gets pushed under the rug. And the reality is, I'm not saying that there's not, in a country of 330 million people, a criminal police officer, just like we occasionally have serial murder surgeons or nurses who we find out later wound up killing a bunch of people. But the reality is so different from that. And you mentioned it a second ago, where you said every time you lay hands on somebody, there's a paperwork trail that happens, and you have people asking questions of what could I have done better, and how could I have fixed it. There is no incentive anywhere in the system that I can think of, and correct me if I'm wrong, from your chief to the council to the mayor, all the way down to the line officer, to hurt someone.
No.
Because ultimately all that's going to happen is the city's going to get sued, taxpayers are going to pay money, nobody wants to see that happen. So, but how detailed is it? Like if you wind up in an altercation where not even a shooting, but where you have somebody really put up a big fight when you're trying to pull them in for a DUI or something like that, by the time you get them to the jail, it took 2 or 3 officers. How many eyeballs are going to be on that incident? How much time is going to be spent thinking about how that happened?
So a couple things. If the suspect's going to complain of injury, right? And when they go to the jail too, they're going to note those injuries when they take them in there. But the officer, like a lot of times we tell them there's a lot of things that help, like writing in your report about, checking your handcuffs and making sure that, when if someone says, that this hurts or that hurts, we're going to take the time to look at that. You're not going to just dismiss it.
Right.
Right. And even though, like when the OC is dispersed, one of the first things after that, once you have control of them, guess what? The next thing is getting a hold of either the ambulance or some sort of way to flush it out and clear that away from them so that they're not in pain anymore. Right. I now have control of you. Now I have to give medical aid. It depends on the policy of each agency. So ours, the way it's written out, you're going to have to do a use of force report. And then that is separate from your regular report. The information that goes in the use of force still has to go into your report, your regular report, but that use of force now goes to a sergeant. The sergeant has to go and interview everybody involved. And they have to go and check, camera footage, either at the site or the body camera footage, right? They're going to check all that. And then they're going to check policy and make sure that it didn't violate anything from policy, right? And then if it's sustained or not, then it goes to me or the chief. We look it over and it's either, turned into an IA or it's a squash deal.
Right.
It's sustained.
Right. So thinking about incentives, I did stumble upon one incentive that's built into the system. People keep talking about systemic problems. You're talking about problems that are built into the system. I'm interested in the subject. Show me where the problems are. I'm trying to find where those problems could be, where it's incentivized. The only thing I've come up with so far, which is something I mentioned to you the other day, I think, from my dad, who again is a retired police officer.
Shout out to Wayne.
Yeah. When he would go do the background checks when they were hiring somebody for the department.
Yeah.
And he went to get the file on this officer that they were thinking about hiring, and the chief wouldn't give him the file. And he said, look, if you don't give me access to his information, you're basically dooming the guy the chances of getting the job, because we're not going to hire him. And they still wouldn't give it to him. And, why would they not give it to him? And the reason why they would not give it to him is because they wanted to get rid of the guy. And at a certain point, so you talked about that first year, you can get fired as long as there's a paper trail for it, for virtually anything. They're trying to weed out, there's so many systems in place to try and weed out somebody who's going to be a problem. But once they're there, you have the union.
Yep.
And I know there's very valid reasons for the union. We both know a story of another officer who without the union would have been, in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
So it's never simplistic like that. But you have a union like that that's powerful. And you have an officer that's not a good officer, there is an incentive for whoever it is, the chief or deputy chief, to bury all that stuff and pass him off to another agency.
Absolutely.
To get rid of him. So how would you fix that? My dad's idea was a national database.
You could, but I think police officer rights would block that.
Right.
Police officer rights would not allow that to happen.
Right. And not to interrupt, because I want to hear what you're saying on this, but just so nobody gets the wrong idea, we could be having this exact same conversation about teachers.
Absolutely.
Because I've heard this over and over again from so many people about bad teachers and how hard it is to get rid of a bad teacher for the exact same reason. And yet, I'm not saying that teachers shouldn't have a union.
Yeah, you and I had to talk, and again, who knows, I get hate mail from this, but unions are great, right? We had the talk. To my knowledge, they were originally created for unfair labor practices and allowed to get the money that's deserved, right?
Yeah.
Or what they feel, and they fight for that. But a lot of the times, it seems like and if you have a horrible boss that's going to fire you for everything, but again, I don't know, that boss should be, and you know, maybe depending upon the agency, I don't know, maybe back east it's a little different. It's pretty hard to do that in this area on the West Coast. Things are very, very strict, in my opinion, on this side of the house. Yeah. But you have to have your ducks in a row. But if that same union, when somebody makes a legitimate mistake that violates policy and that person isn't willing to take responsibility for the mistake that they made so that we could move forward and potentially get them the training that they need, right? Make them a better officer, right? If you could show a sustained movement or progress of saying, look, I'm not making this mistake, then we move on. Because the whole point of a write-up or some sort of discipline is to change behavior. I don't want to fire you. I put resources into you. I put you through an academy. I paid for all the testing to make sure that you're good to go. I put you through the FTO program and kept you on for that year. I need you. You're a valuable resource, because if I get rid of you, then I have to hire somebody else and go through this all over again. So if I could discipline you, again, people don't like that word, and you just took responsibility and fixed that problem. So part of me is teaching people how to take responsibility. Sure. That's one way I want to fix it. Is can we have that hard conversation to say, look, I'm not out to fire you. I just want you to take responsibility and fix this problem and don't do it again. Right. Now, I think that's easier said than done, right? The national database, I don't know that.
I'm just throwing out, I think he was just throwing that out there too, but
I like the idea.
You have a problem.
I had a conversation with an officer friend about it, and you know, he'd said like making it more independent, you know, not necessarily citizen review, but other officers, maybe from other agencies, you know, a group that looked at these things. Right. You know, that way you couldn't say it was somebody unfairly picking on you. You know, that could be another way of doing it. But
so you could get rid of an officer, you mean?
Well,
so that way it's not affect supervisor.
But legislative, like for this state, legislatively, Nevada rights, Officer Rights 289 protects them and shows how they need to be investigated and what happens with their disciplinary record. That would have to change before we could do anything of that. And I don't know to speak to Portland or any of the other states if that's how they do it. I would imagine that's how they do it. I should look into that. Yeah. But I mean, here we'd have to look. We'd have to have that. So the union, they're strong, and I understand that they're needed, but there needs to be some sort of give to where, okay, can you admit that your person made a mistake? Right. You know? And a lot of times they don't want that to be in that file that you're talking about. So that write-up would go into that file. And a lot of contracts will say it has to stay in there for 12 months, 24 months, 36 months, depending upon how high that level goes, right?
If you're in front of an auditorium full of people who don't know a lot about law enforcement or whose impression, let's put it this way, their impression of law enforcement is primarily negative for various reasons. What would you want them to know maybe that you don't think they know now?
What would
you
want them to know
about the people? Yeah. What do people who don't do your job not understand that you would like them to understand?
Okay. I think I have an answer for this. I'm not saying that the officers involved in both those incidents.
Which incidents? Wendy's?
Yeah, Wendy's, Minneapolis. I'm not going to, you know, say whatever decisions. I want due process to come through. All of those men, regardless right or wrong, and how I feel about those situations, there should have been due process. They should have been put immediately on administrative leave and had an internal investigation with also a criminal investigation to look at both sides of that and dealing with that and figuring it out versus just pulling the trigger and doing a knee-jerk reaction, because I think there's going to be other repercussions down the road by making a horrible decision by firing them. I think and it's going to really upset the public even more.
Right.
But
in the case of Wendy's shooting, George Floyd's a little more, you know, it's pretty good. Yeah. But with the Wendy's shooting,
yeah,
if that gets plead down, manslaughter, or maybe he's found not guilty because they try and make it, whatever, first or second degree murder, that's going to cause a riot.
100%. And
So
again,
a really short-term political gain for the district attorney who's
right,
currently being investigated for
right,
stealing money from the city, but a really terrible potential long-term outcome for Atlanta.
agreed. But here's the thing, and part of the reason why I switched, because I saw the effect of law enforcement on friends and even my own mother. I see effects of what it does. That's why I chose the path that I did, because, you know, wise man learns from somebody else's, right? Or an even wiser one learns from it. You know, you learn from your own, but even wiser learns from somebody else's. And that's how I'm always watching. And I will tell you this, you take a human being, no different. They can make mistakes. They're fallible, right? I understand people want to hold them to a higher standard. And like I said, there needs to be a responsibility for what they're capable of doing. But you take a human being and you put them in this environment where they don't sleep well. If they're working graveyard and swing shift, so swing shift, they're never home with their family because their family's up during that time. They'll come home at graveyard, at least get to sleep next to their wife. But then they have to go to court in the morning for all the DUIs and whatever else that they did to go to court throughout the day, and then go back to work again. Sometimes even work overtime into that night and then have to sleep a little bit, or maybe not, right? You don't get that much sleep. Sleep deprivation is not good over a prolonged time, right? Doc Potterat, if people look him up, he was a Navy SEAL psych doc, and now he's like a trainer for the Rangers. And he talked, Tom tried to get me to go see him more times, and I didn't go. I finally went and I met this man and I listened to him speak, and the things he said, he's 100% right. He talked about training the SEALs and saying that, you know, he gets these guys white hot and then sends them off to deployment for 6 months or 8 months, and then they come back. He goes, but they get to decompress. A police officer, he said, he's afraid for the law enforcement because they don't decompress. They do 25 years of that or more. And he thought that there was going to be a big mental health issue with law enforcement. And I think he's right. And that mental health is part of that is sleep. They need sleep. They also don't eat very well. Police officers tend to not eat and take care of themselves. This isn't all, but a majority, they don't sleep and eat well. It's hard, right? Especially if they don't pre-plan. They're starting wellness programs in agencies, which I think is a great start because it starts to get them to look at those things. Because when you don't eat and you don't sleep well, it starts to lead into apathy, right? But then you also go out and you see, especially traditional law enforcement, you're seeing the worst of the worst. You know, you talk about seeing traffic accidents and just seeing mauled people or abused children. You go down the list of the worst that they see. They're not seeing good anymore. All they see is bad. That starts to play in your mind. So then guess what? The whole world is bad. Then they have to come home and compartmentalize that because they don't want to take it into their house.
Right.
So the good ones do, but then that stays in their mind. Sometimes the guys let it get away, and guess what? They're on their third marriage, right? Because they can't compartmentalize it. So now you have that issue with them. That all leads into just a horrible mental health issue for them. And then, again, apathetic, because now they're going from problem to problem. And they're like, now I have to solve your problem. I'm on my third marriage. I'm not sleeping or eating well, you know, and now I'm here listening to your issues. I'm not saying that law enforcement is like that. I'm saying that it has the propensity to do that. And I think that that's what's plaguing them. They need other things set in place. And I think wellness helps that because it helps them work out diet and sleep and what's important. And then going to counseling and, you know, talking through those problems so you don't take it into your wife, you know, and dealing with that stuff. So the smart ones are doing that, but I think agencies around are starting to kind of pick that up. But, you know, I think it's a little late. Doc Potterat was going to make an app. So I don't know if he watches this video, but he was going to make an app. And I think it's a great idea if somebody else can make this app up. But it was a self-check because here's the thing. This is the part about the mental health. It's just like probably like the SEALs. No officer is going to tell you that they have, you know, mixed feelings or they're feeling upset or they're feeling depressed or whatever. Why? Because they don't want to not do their job.
Right.
Because that could be an issue, right? Same thing with SEALs. The SEALs Doc Potterat said SEALs never wanted to talk to him. So we had to do this thing called the checkup from the neck up. They'd come back from an op and he'd say, how did it go? And they were like, yep, went fine. You know, they didn't really want to talk to him. The more they built a relationship with him and they trusted him because he wasn't writing everything down, the more open they were with him. And then he could have a good talk with them and help them through the issue. And then that goes into the belief system, kind of that ABC journaling. That's where I got that from, was from Doc Potter. He walked through that. And it's just sports psychology stuff, but it really works when you make officers do that. Tom got me doing that, and now I've got a bunch of people doing that. That makes a big difference. Get an officer to go out there and journal. It's not for anybody else to see. It's for him to deal. And that app was basically, it was a bunch of questions that asked him about eating and sleeping and everything else. And it would either give you a green, yellow, or red. If it were red, you might want to think about calling in sick that day, you know, or trying, maybe you need to go get some more sleep or go talk to somebody. If it was yellow, right? And then if it's green, you're good to go. But it's just a simple way for that officer to check in with nobody else to know. They can deal with that issue. And I think the administration, that's why sergeants should be out there talking with their people and making sure that they're feeling all right. I mean, obviously, if you don't have a good relationship, they're not going to be honest with you, you know, and it's not about taking officers off the street either. It's just about getting them that help. But there also has to be, because that warrior ethos is like, nothing's wrong with me, I'm fine, right? Well, you know, it isn't, there's nothing wrong with you to just say, yeah, I am hurting, you know, so that people can talk to you, right, and get you through. You are human. So if anything, officers are human, and you have to look at that, you know, and they do want to help their fellow citizen. That's why they're out there. Cops don't like bullies. That's the whole point. They're trying to stop the bullies from hurting all the average citizens. Knock it off. I'm trying to take the bullies off the street. If you want to get Bert and Ernie, that's really what it is.
How many years you been working law enforcement?
22.
22. Out of those 22 years, how many of the officers that you've met have fit the description of doing the job because they don't like bullies and they want to help people?
Quite a few, especially the ones in my circle. When you talk to them, each one has their own quirk. There's some like motor cops. Those guys will give their own mother a ticket. You know, those guys are like bred to do that stuff. You know, they just cite everybody. Right. Mom, I'm telling you, this is the last time. Get out of the car. Right. You know, but that's just, or like highway patrol. You know, then you've got detectives. When you get those guys, they thrive on asking those questions and digging through and trying to figure out so that they can get justice for whatever crime that was committed. Because I think that's the problem with apathy. I think I told you that before. I remember being on a battery call and I remember someone had gotten hit. And I'm just like, you got hit. Who cares? Right? I'm thinking to myself, I get hit in the gym. I get hit here. But here's the thing. This person doesn't deal with violence all the time. They're not used to it. Right. And then I'm thinking to myself, why should they be? This is affecting them. They're pretty upset about this. Right. So I need to be more empathetic and go, hey, I fully understand. Let's walk you through this. You do this and I will get you, you know, I will get you the help that you need. Right. You know, and it's just trying to, I guess, relate to those people. And a lot of times officers do. The officers I see, they're just amazing when you see them out there. Now, on the flip side, when you get somebody that's going to not work with them, then there's going to be some sort of a physical altercation when someone doesn't want to go to jail. Right. And that's where the training comes in. You know, the better trained they are, the better they can do that without getting themselves hurt. That's another issue you'll see in report writing, which we had to teach our officers to do. You're like, it took 3 of you to get control of this guy, and he's got, you know, an abrasion, you know, a sprained finger and you know, maybe a cut on his eye, and nothing happened to you? Oh yeah, no, Tom's knee hurts and so-and-so's uniform was ripped and, you know, whatever. It's like, put that in the report. Right. You need to put that in the report. You got injured. So we started teaching officers laceration and abrasion and, you know, different medical terms that they start to put in there because they were getting hurt. They need to start documenting that because that's what it looks like. Now the DA sees that or whoever, and it's like, nothing happened to the officer, but this guy got jacked up. That seems wrong. No, that didn't happen. The officer's uniform got ripped. We had to send him to, you know, CDS claim because his finger was broken or whatever, right? That's the other thing the public doesn't see. They see that the bad guy is injured, but they don't see how injured the cop is. Mm-hmm.
To be honest with you, the stuff that I hear about law enforcement these days, and part of why I almost got rid of Facebook and had to unfriend so many people, or unfollow anyway. And I know some of these people, and some of them are dirtbags, but some of these people are good people, and they just don't know anything about your job. I mean, they really they know, or here's what they know. They know what they see on CNN. They know
Yeah.
what they see on MSNBC.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you my own father. My own father will see stuff, not recently, but I remember some incident that happened, and my dad's like, "Why didn't they just shoot the knife out of his hand?"
Right.
And I go, "Dad, look, do you realize how difficult it would be to shoot the
Right.
hand?"
Right.
I said, "Not to mention if you missed." And the idea of shooting when the law enforcement shoot, everything thinks they shoot to kill, and they
Right.
don't. They shoot to stop the threat, right? And if I'm going to shoot, because then you have Joe Biden, shoot him in the leg.
Right. I heard that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. No, we're going to shoot center mass because it's the largest portion that's available to me. This could be center mass, but I'm going to shoot center mass of whatever is available to me. So if the only thing that's available to me is the leg, then I'm going to shoot center mass of that leg.
Right.
But if I have the whole body, I'm going to shoot for center mass because it's a big mass that I need to hit and stop that threat.
Not
Right?
to mention all the arteries in your leg and the fact
Yeah.
that a guy could still shoot you while he's laying on the ground.
Yeah, but once I explained that to my dad, he realized, and I said, it's this inundation of TV, just like anything else, like social media and all that other stuff. It makes people believe what is true when it's not.
Right.
Like the shotguns. They had to teach people because there were people. I think I have to go back and do it, but like they get shot with a shotgun and they fly back, and there would have to be equal reaction from the shotgun. I'd have to boom, to create that.
Right.
And that's not what's happening.
Right.
So you get ingrained in your mind, and then you become this belief system, and then that must be true. Right. And there's just so many times when you stop people, I know my rights. You have to read me my rights. No, I only have to read you your rights if I'm asking you questions about the crime.
Right.
I don't have to. I'm not asking you anything. I have all the evidence that I need, so I'm taking you to jail.
Right.
That's really it. No, you have to talk to me. No, I don't. So it's just this belief that they, I hate saying go educate yourself, but maybe go ask an officer if you really want to learn. Go take a Citizens Academy if you really want to learn.
That's why we're doing the podcast.
Yeah. There you go. Like the Citizens Academy, when those people have to go in and do like force on force, that's the shooting with the Sims, they realize how incredibly hard it is to make those decisions.
Yes.
I took my wife through it. It was a date night. We went to one of those T1, and there was this scenario where through a window on a street, this guy's beating his wife. My wife doesn't say a word. She just starts shooting him through the window. And I'm like, you got to tell him to stop. She's like, he was hitting her. I was like, hey, you got to talk. There's another one. She's going to her car, and the guy's like, hey, it's all simulated. He's like, hey, babe, you need some help? And she's like, she stands there. She pulls the gun out, like to show him. And then the scenario player on the computer can change it however he wants. So he makes it just kind of walk towards her. Boom, she just shoots him. She didn't tell him to stop. So I'm like, you got to talk to people. You got to say, she's like, no, he was walking towards me. I'm like, you're going to get sued. You got to have these conversations because it's the belief of what she thought was right.
Right.
And that they think police officers can do that. And there's a lot that has to go through a police officer's mind. When you think even of the rules of the range, just the rule of what's beyond your target.
Yes.
Officers are thinking of that. If I get into a shooting, crap, there's a school behind me. I'm going to try to change my angle and walk this way so that and then I got to think about when I walk this way, what did I make a backdrop for this guy to shoot at?
Yeah.
All that crap's going through their mind.
Yeah. One of my favorite videos was that video of it was a community organizer that was not very pro-police, and they put him through simulations.
Yeah.
And to his credit, he had a completely different view after experiencing it. But
once you feel that, it changes your mind because it's just like, wow, And it's funny, even in the scenarios, the officers will go, I didn't do that. And you'll have to go back and show them the video, and they're like, wow. Because in their mind, they saw it completely different. Yeah. They did not see it the same way.
Yeah.
How they're taking that information and go back to that Atlanta shooting, what did the officer know? What did he see? That's what you have to ask.
At that moment.
At that moment. What did he see?
Yeah.
Why did he react the way he did? Not the camera angle you saw.
Yeah.
Not to mention with all the studies about heart rate raising up and tunnel vision and everything else that's going on, right?
Yeah, you know, they'll have the occasional story that'll come up where you have a suspect that was shot multiple times and by multiple officers, and people will immediately read into that some sort of animus or hostility, and it's like, no, it's just how it works when, you know, people just don't understand violence. Thankfully, we live in a society where the majority of people don't have to understand how violence works and
Right.
what happens to your mind when you're engaged in a high stress situation like that. But we do need some kind of education on it. Otherwise, we're going to be in a situation like we are now, where you're going to have a bunch of people make a bunch of really bad decisions when they don't have to, when they don't otherwise need to.
Well, here's a difference in society. I'll tell you this, and this maybe even 10 years ago, and it's gotten substantially lower. But there was a new hire that had gotten hired, and I was talking to him, and he told me he'd never been in a fight, a physical fight. Mm-hmm. And I was like, I went home and I told my wife, I go, hey, do you know so-and-so's never been in a fight? And she's like, what if Eli's never been in a fight? And I go, look, if Eli never gets into a fight, I'm fine with that. I don't need Eli to get into a fight. But if Eli never gets into a fight and he wants to be a police officer, I have a problem with that.
Right.
It's not realistic. Someone's going to punch him.
Right.
He's going to wind up getting into a fight.
Right.
And what happens is if you're not comfortable with that violence, so to speak, or adapted to it, you're going to freak out and do something crazy that's not going to be justified because you're freaking out because you're not used to violence.
Right. And people that don't know, Eli's your son.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he's a soft heart kid, you know. I couldn't even see him. I don't know if he ever will get in a fight, you know. And again, I don't care if he does or doesn't.
Right.
But it's just it's crazy to me. But and we'll do that. We used to do that in the academies. I remember my academy. It was like, how many of you been in a fight? You know, raise your hand. How many of you been in a knockdown drag out fight? Less people raise their hand. As the academies went on, less and less people could answer that question.
Right.
And then it was like you had to define what a fight was. And it was like, well, I got in a fight with my sister once. Like, what are you talking about? You know, and you're like, no, that's not a fight.
Right.
I'm not kidding. Those were literal scenarios. I got to get a fight with a coworker. Well, what do you mean? You guys fought? No, we were yelling at each other. No, I don't mean an argument. I mean like hitting somebody. They're like, oh, no, not that. You know? And that's the people that are coming in. And again, I don't want to say I'm promoting violence or anything like that. It's just, you know, what do you think's going to happen? And a lot of the times what happened is I put on a fist suit.
Yeah.
And they'd say, hey, give me, you know, scenario. Sir, give me your license. And I'd reach back and I'd do like this and boom, punch him in the face.
Yeah.
And I would get a couple reactions. One would be, sir, stop. And then I hit him. Sir, stop. And then I hit him. Sir, stop. Like stuck on this metronome.
Yeah.
There'd be the other ones. You'd see a switch go off and then they would tackle me, you know, and you're like, okay, that guy's kind of aggressive. And then you'd get other ones that would just cower. You know, there were just these different, and you don't give up on them. You put them in those scenarios to try to inoculate that. Can they adapt to it and get better?
Right.
You know, can you dial the guy that tackled me down and can you dial the other ones up?
Right.
And you try to weed them out or get them stronger or weaker, if you will. And
that's super fascinating to me. That's what I talked to Andy about the same thing because, you know, for the SEAL training, because I'm interested in how much of that can be retrained. So how much success did you have retraining some of those reactions?
It was good. Because you talk to them. We video it, we talk to them, and they didn't even believe it sometimes because again, the violence freaked them out and their brain wasn't working right.
Right.
You know, and they're like, whoa, you know, and so we're trying to inoculate them to the stress. Same thing with Sims, you know, they're doing one of these when they're getting shot. And then by the end of the week, they're dialed in and they're learning that, hey, you know, I gotta get engaged. Right. Crazy things like, you know, the Taiki Psyche moment where everything slows down or things blow up. Like I remember a scenario. It was a bank robber that was in a hotel and it was me and my partner. And then there was the gym or the apartment complex owner. And he's like, yeah, that guy is on the news. And I'm like, yeah, he goes, that's him right there. And I turn and I look and I'm not kidding you. The barrel of the gun was in my face. The guy was 25 feet away from me, mind you. The barrel was this big and it was right here in my mind and everything slowed down. I was like, go, and I pushed him, and I hid behind like Tom Arnold in that movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I hid behind this little pole, and they were like, they're like this scenario. Go, what are you gonna do? And I'm like, looked at my partner. I'm like, and it was based off of an actual shooting that had happened in the area. The guy had shot at us, so I'm like, hey, he shot at us. Game on. Dum 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 dum, and we dumped him. And then, why'd you shoot at him? And I'm like, because of this and this and this. And they're like, all right, good job, go. You know, they try to stress you out.
Sure.
Get you past that to see how well you're going to adapt to that stress.
Right.
But yeah, crazy. And I remember by the end of the week, I was dialed in.
Right.
You know, because you're like, oh, okay, I get it. I just got to react to this stuff.
Right.
They're not gonna, you know, annihilate me. But Sims hurt like a mother.
They do hurt.
Yeah.
I don't know what you're using now, but way back in 30 years ago when I was in the Army, they were little blue plastic.
Yeah.
Those hurt really bad.
The simunition rounds. Yeah, they have ones that are UTM. Those are legit. Yeah. They still come out hot and they hurt. And like what we'll do is like if we're doing those training days, we tell everybody no vests, only T-shirts. We're like, man.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think that's good. And we brought it back full circle to what it really does come back to. And I think Paul was 100% right. Ultimately, the solutions to this, in my opinion, are going to come down to training.
Absolutely. That's the number one thing that I would say is it has to be training.
It's going to come down to training. It's going to come down to building on the knowledge of all the people who've done this career for years and years and years and built on the knowledge of the people that came before them, not from destroying the system and starting all again, which is insane. And
yep.
Part of me, I feel sad saying it, legitimately don't feel good saying this, but part of me knows that's not going to happen. And the reason why I know it's not going to happen is because what's going to happen in Minneapolis, if they truly do, if they make some reforms and change and put some psychologists in on rides with them or something like that, that's fine. But if they truly do just get rid of the police department and try and work with social workers, we both know there's going to be a bunch of innocent people dead, and then they're going to go back to regular policing. And I would prefer that didn't happen, but unfortunately, I think that's what's going to happen. But
it's going to happen. Social workers going to get hit, and they're going to go, "Hey, can the police come?"
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah, because
they'll be lucky if they just get hit.
Right. Yeah, the violent are going to be violent, plain and simple.
This especially because they were talking about them in domestic altercations, and I was thinking, are you kidding me? This is like the most violent situation you're going to walk into.
One of the number one things that gets officers killed.
Yeah. Well, let's hope it doesn't come to that. Let's hope more people still want to have. It's great that we live in a society where so many people aren't exposed to that kind of violence, but I think in a society like that there's an obligation to constantly have to educate people about what violence means, including Joe Biden, about not why you can't shoot people in the leg, so that we don't make policy based on ridiculous ideas.
Yeah. I just want to add to I think training, to me, it's a no-brainer. I mean, it's just common sense.
Right.
If you don't like the performance, provide the training.
Right.
The next piece would be, and I don't know how this will be taken, but relationship. Build some sort of a relationship so that you can have an influence, which basically turns out to being training for the public as a whole too.
Yeah.
Because but building a relationship, this is what the police do. This is the service that they offer.
You can't resist arrest.
Yeah.
If you're getting arrested and it's false imprisonment, you shouldn't be arrested. Get a good attorney and sue the city, and you're going to make a lot of money. And
absolutely.
But you cannot resist arrest. Well, Ray, I appreciate you taking the time for doing this podcast. I think it's timely. Hopefully it will help give people some new ideas, and appreciate it very much.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you for this. I love it. It's good because you make me think, and I don't know. I'm with you. Hopefully, I've never seen it as crazy as it is. A lot of things have happened with law enforcement. It's a pretty intimidating and scary time. People need to, there's a lot of people out there saying, who's going to speak, doesn't involve me. It's not that bad yet. I think people need to start getting involved and start talking about this.
Yes.
It's reached that idea that'll never happen. Well, never thought, we were going to shut our economy down for 3 months either.
Correct. Yeah.
So,
like I said, just a few blocks from me, they blocked the exits to the business and the police department and lit it on fire, hoping to I apparently burned some officers alive.
Yeah.
The only people that got hurt by that were my fellow business owners who happen to be black, all on that corner. They're all black. They're enraged. I shot some video at the meeting the other day where they want to make it very clear that nobody that does anything like that has any excuse whatsoever. And it certainly has nothing to do with trying to make things better for African Americans in the United States. And, but that's going to keep happening.
Yeah.
Because if you let people break the law, people have this idea like, oh, it's just a property crime. And I have to remind them, what's dangerous isn't the property crime, it's the fucking mob. You have a mob of people there. And they'll do stuff like this. Eventually they are going to burn some people alive.
I wrote that one simple post and I said, unacceptable behavior, unchallenged, is dangerous.
Yes.
If you are not, plain and simple. It's just like your kids. I'm not calling people kids, but it's behavior. So it doesn't matter if it's my kids or an adult. But if my kid does something like throw a temper tantrum, right? And I could ignore it, right? Or I could have a talk with them, but it doesn't go unchecked. There has to be something to go, do you feel that was necessary?
Right.
Something to make it, there be some sort of responsibility, accountability for what you just did.
Yeah.
Because it's not going to go unchecked. And it goes unchecked, it becomes dangerous.
Yeah. Can't let people run wild through the street. So hopefully we'll figure that out before more people get hurt.
One final thought here, in the essence of making people remember and do whatever, I want to keep the real Matt Thornton alive. My stories. Right. We were just telling this story at the fundraiser today. And I said, somebody said something and I go, oh yeah, I remember I was a blue belt and I did this really cool pass where I grabbed the guy's pant legs and I rolled like a Tootsie Roll up his legs and past his guard. And I did it and I was feeling all good about myself. And I looked over at you and it was in front of the entire class. You're like, where'd you learn that? I said, I saw Jean-Jacques Machado do it. And you said, let Jean-Jacques Machado do it then. Completely, my scales were completely inflated and then deflated all in the same moment.
Yeah.
That's my coach right there.
There you go.
I got tons of stories like that.
well, unfortunately, we're out of time now, Ray.
Yeah. People will know the real Thornton in my book.
Yeah. All right.
Not this soft, happy guy that gives everybody water now. I'm not buying it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, my friend. Stay safe.
Right. See ya.
Take care.
Yep. Bye.